The magnetic North Pole, that fixed point your compass has trusted for centuries, is racing towards Siberia at speeds never recorded in human history. 55 kilometers per year. Then it slowed. Then it sped up again. Scientists cannot fully explain why. Meanwhile, a growing wound opens in Earth's magnetic shield over the South Atlantic. Satellites malfunction when they pass through it. And 42,000 years ago, when this shield collapsed almost entirely, Neanderthals vanished from the Earth. Could it happen again? But before we begin, do not forget to subscribe, and if you truly enjoy these videos, please leave a like. Let us begin. Something is moving beneath your feet. Not the slow grind of continents, not the familiar rumble of an earthquake. Something deeper, something invisible. The magnetic North Pole that fixed. Point your compass has trusted for centuries, is racing towards Siberia at speeds never recorded in human history. 55 kilometers per year. Then it slowed. Then it sped up again. Scientists cannot fully explain why. Meanwhile, a growing wound opens in Earth's magnetic shield over the South Atlantic. Satellites malfunction when they pass through it. Astronauts report strange flashes of light in their eyes. The International Space Station shuts down sensitive equipment each time it crosses this zone of weakness. And that weak spot is expanding, growing by an area nearly half the size of continental Europe in just 11 years. But here is what keeps researchers awake at night. 42,000 years ago, the magnetic field collapsed almost entirely. For several hundred years, the poles wandered chaotically. Cosmic radiation flooded the atmosphere. The ozone layer thinned. Weather patterns shifted violently. And across the planet, something terrible happened. Neanderthals vanished. Giant animals disappeared. Modern humans retreated into caves and painted their walls with images of a world transformed. Could it happen again? Are we watching the early signs of another magnetic catastrophe? Or are these changes simply part of Earth's natural rhythm? Nothing to fear. Just another fluctuation in a system that has protected life for billions of years. In the next 2 hours, we will travel deep into the planet. We will examine the liquid iron ocean churning 3,000 kilometers beneath our feet. We will follow the magnetic North Pole on its unprecedented dash across the Arctic. We will investigate ancient floods that reshaped continents and the controversial theories that claim lost civilizations fell victim to sudden pole shifts. We will separate scientific fact from apocalyptic fiction, and we will ask the question that matters most. If the magnetic field continues to weaken, if the poles do flip, what happens to a world that runs on electricity, satellites, and invisible signals crisscrossing the sky? The answers are not simple, but the evidence is there, written in ancient rocks, frozen in ice cores, recorded in the growth rings of trees that lived 40,000 years ago. This is the story of Earth's magnetic heartbeat, the invisible force that makes life possible, and the terrifying possibility that it might one day fail. Chapter 1. The Invisible Shield. Picture the Earth not as a solid ball of rock and water, but as something far stranger. A layered sphere with a molten heart. At the center sits the inner core, a solid ball of iron and nickel roughly the size of the moon. It burns at temperatures approaching those on the surface of the sun, nearly 6,000 degrees Celsius, yet it remains solid because the pressure at the center of the planet is so immense that the atoms cannot move freely enough to become liquid. Surrounding this solid heart is the outer core, 2,200 kilometers of liquid metal, iron, nickel, trace elements, churning, flowing, convecting in slow motion as heat escapes from the inner core outward toward the cooler mantle above. This is not gentle circulation. This is a turbulent ocean of metal moving at speeds that seem slow to human perception but are geologically significant. A few kilometers per year, enough to create something remarkable. The motion of electrically conductive liquid through an existing magnetic field generates electrical currents. Those currents in turn generate their own magnetic fields. This is the geodynamo, a self-sustaining engine of magnetism powered by nothing more than heat, flowing outward from the center of the Earth. It has operated for at least 3.5 billion years, perhaps longer, long before complex life existed, long before the first cells learned to harness sunlight. The magnetic field was already there, already protecting whatever fragile chemistry was unfolding in the ancient oceans. The field extends far beyond the surface. It reaches into space for tens of thousands of kilometers, creating a bubble around the planet called the magnetosphere. This is not a perfect sphere. The solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles blasting outward from the sun at 400 kilometers per second, presses against it, compresses it on the day side of Earth to roughly 60,000 kilometers, stretches it on the night side into a long tail that extends past the orbit of the Moon. Without this shield, life as we know it would be impossible. The solar wind carries protons and electrons energized to tremendous speeds. Left unchecked, these particles would strip away the atmosphere over geological time. Mars once had a thick atmosphere and liquid water on its surface. Its magnetic field died 4 billion years ago when its core cooled and solidified. Today, Mars has an atmosphere less than 1% as dense as Earth's. Its water is gone, frozen in polar caps or lost to space. Venus tells a similar story. No global magnetic field. Its atmosphere was not stripped away because Venus is more massive and holds its gases more tightly. But the solar wind interacts directly with the upper atmosphere. Water molecules are broken apart. Hydrogen escapes. Over billions of years, Venus lost its oceans, not through magnetic erosion, but through a runaway greenhouse effect that the absent magnetic field could not prevent. Earth escaped this fate. The magnetic field deflects most charged particles around the planet. They spiral along the field lines toward the poles, where some penetrate the upper atmosphere and collide with oxygen and nitrogen atoms. This is the aurora, the northern and southern lights, a visible reminder that the invisible shield is working, that the constant bombardment from space is being redirected rather than allowed to strike the surface. But the protection is not absolute. The magnetosphere is dynamic. It responds to changes in the solar wind. During solar storms, massive eruptions on the sun called coronal mass ejections send billions of tons of charged particles hurtling toward Earth at speeds exceeding 1,000 kilometers per second. When these clouds hit the magnetosphere, they compress it violently. The field lines reconnect in complex ways. Energy is released. Currents flow through the upper atmosphere and even into the ground. In 1859, a solar storm of unprecedented intensity struck Earth. The Carrington event, named after the British astronomer who observed the solar flare that preceded it. Auroras were visible as far south as the Caribbean. Telegraph systems across Europe and North America failed. Some operators received electrical shocks. Some telegraph lines caught fire. The magnetic field held. But the infrastructure of the mid-19th century, primitive by modern standards, was overwhelmed. Today we depend on satellites for communication, navigation, weather forecasting, and military operations. We depend on power grids that span continents, transmitting electricity through networks designed for efficiency rather than resilience. A Carrington-scale event today would not merely inconvenience telegraph operators, it would threaten the foundations of modern civilization. But here is the key point. The Carrington event happened when the magnetic field was at full strength. What would happen during a period when the field had weakened significantly? What would happen during a geomagnetic reversal, when the field's strength drops to perhaps 5 or 10% of normal for centuries at a time? These questions lead us to an uncomfortable truth. The magnetic field is not constant. It fluctuates, it weakens, it strengthens, and periodically, on timescales ranging from tens of thousands to millions of years, it does something extraordinary. It flips. North becomes south. South becomes north. The compass that has guided human navigation for centuries would point in the opposite direction. This is not speculation. This is recorded in the rocks beneath your feet. Every time volcanic lava cools and solidifies, tiny particles of magnetite within it align with the prevailing magnetic field, locking in a record of the field's direction and intensity at that moment. Every time sediment settles on the ocean floor, magnetic grains rotate to point toward magnetic north before becoming trapped in the accumulating layers. Scientists have read these records for decades. They have identified at least 183 complete reversals in the past 83 million years. Some sources suggest several hundred reversals in the past 160 million years. The pattern is irregular. Sometimes the field maintains its orientation for millions of years. These long stable periods are called supercrons. The most recent, the Cretaceous normal supercron, lasted from approximately 121 million to 83 million years ago. Dinosaurs lived and died under a stable magnetic field for nearly 40 million years. At other times, reversals happened frequently. During the past 5 million years, the average interval between reversals has been roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years. The last complete reversal, the Brunhes-Matuyama event, occurred approximately 780,000 years ago. By this measure, we are overdue. But overdue does not mean imminent. The statistics are based on averages, and geological processes do not follow predictable schedules. The field could flip tomorrow. It could flip in 50,000 years. There is no way to know with certainty. What we do know is that the field has been weakening. Over the past 200 years since systematic measurements began, the overall intensity of the geomagnetic field has declined by roughly 9%. Some researchers estimate that over the past 3,000 years, the field has lost roughly 30% of its strength. If this trend continues, and there is no guarantee that it will, the field could approach critical weakness within centuries. Critics point out that the current field strength, even after the recent decline, remains stronger than it has been for most of the past 50,000 years. The weakening could stop at any time. It could reverse. The field is inherently variable, and short-term trends do not necessarily indicate long-term trajectories. But the data from satellites tells a more nuanced story. The European Space Agency's SWARM mission, launched in 2013, has mapped the magnetic field with unprecedented precision. The results reveal that the weakening is not uniform. Some regions are losing field strength rapidly. Others are gaining. The most dramatic changes are occurring over the South Atlantic and over North America. A region of unusual weakness called the South Atlantic anomaly is growing and intensifying. Meanwhile, a strong region over Siberia is expanding while a comparable strong region over Canada is shrinking. These patterns suggest that something significant is happening deep within the outer core. The convection patterns are changing. The distribution of heat and electrical currents is shifting. The engine that generates our magnetic shield is undergoing a transition. Whether that transition leads to a full reversal, a temporary excursion, or simply a reorganization of the field's geometry remains to be seen. One thing is certain. The magnetic field that protects us is not eternal. It is not fixed. It is a dynamic system driven by processes we are only beginning to understand, operating on timescales that dwarf human civilization. We have built a technological society on the assumption that certain features of our planet are stable. The atmosphere will continue to contain oxygen. The oceans will remain liquid. The magnetic field will continue to shield us from space. That assumption may not hold forever. The field has changed before. It has collapsed before. And when it did, the consequences rippled across the entire planet. In the next chapter, we will follow the magnetic North Pole on its unprecedented journey across the Arctic. We will examine why it has accelerated in recent decades, why it suddenly decelerated, and why scientists around the world are watching its movements with a mixture of fascination and concern. Chapter 2. The Wandering North, June 1st, 1831. A small expedition party struggles across the frozen wasteland of the Canadian Arctic. They are searching for something that cannot be seen, something that exists only as a direction, a pull on a compass needle. James Clark Ross, a British naval officer, plants a flag on a desolate stretch of the Boothia Peninsula. His compass needle points straight down, not north, not any horizontal direction, directly into the earth beneath his feet. He has found it, the magnetic North Pole, the point where Earth's magnetic field lines converge and plunge vertically into the planet, the spot that every compass in the Northern Hemisphere has been pointing toward, more or less, for as long as humans have used magnetized needles to navigate. Ross records the location. Approximately 70 degrees north latitude, 96 degrees west longitude, Cape Adelaide on the Boothia Peninsula, northern Canada. He does not know that this position is temporary. He does not know that the pole has been wandering for as long as Earth has had a magnetic field. He does not know that within 2 centuries the pole will have travelled more than 1,100 kilometres from where he now stands, racing across the Arctic Ocean towards Siberia. For centuries before Ross, navigators understood that magnetic north and true north were not the same. True north is fixed. The geographic North Pole marks the axis around which the planet rotates. It does not move. Magnetic north wanders. The angle between them, called magnetic declination, varies depending on where you stand on Earth's surface. Maps noted this discrepancy. Sailors adjusted their courses, but no one truly understood why the difference existed or why it changed over time. We now know that the magnetic poles are surface expressions of deep internal processes. The field is generated in the outer core, that churning ocean of liquid iron thousands of kilometers down. The convection patterns in that metallic sea are not simple or stable. They shift over years, decades, centuries. As they shift, the geometry of the magnetic field at the surface changes. The poles move. From Ross's discovery until the late 20th century, the North Magnetic Pole moved slowly, a few kilometers per year, wandering in a rough circle around the Canadian Arctic. Expeditions returned periodically to track its position. By 1904, it had moved roughly 50 kilometers from Ross's original location. By 1948, it had reached Prince of Wales Island. By 2000, it had left Canadian territory entirely and was heading into the Arctic Ocean. Then something changed. Around 1990, the pole accelerated. The speed jumped from roughly 15 kilometers per year to more than 50. By the mid-2000s, it was racing towards Siberia at nearly 60 kilometers per year, the fastest movement ever recorded in the modern era of measurement. Scientists scrambled to understand. They pored over satellite data. They ran computer simulations of the outer core. They published papers with conflicting interpretations. Was this the beginning of a reversal, a precursor to magnetic chaos, or simply a normal fluctuation, unusual but not unprecedented? The answer, it turns out, lies in the structure of the field itself. The magnetic field is not a simple bar magnet embedded in the planet's core. It is a complex superposition of many different field patterns. The dominant pattern, responsible for about 90% of the field at the surface, is dipolar, like a bar magnet with a north and south pole. But beneath this primary pattern are weaker components: quadrupole, octopole, higher order terms that create irregularities and asymmetries. More importantly, the field strength is not uniform. There are regions where the field is stronger and regions where it is weaker. These regions correspond to structures deep in the outer core, giant blobs of magnetic flux, areas where the convection is particularly intense or particularly sluggish. The North Magnetic Pole sits where the vertical component of the field is strongest. This corresponds to a blob of magnetic flux beneath the Arctic. But there are 2 such blobs in the Northern Hemisphere, one beneath Canada, one beneath Siberia. For most of recorded history, the Canadian blob was dominant. The pole sat near it, circled it, stayed in its neighbourhood. Around 1990, the balance began to shift. The Siberian blob strengthened, the Canadian blob weakened. Scientists at the British Geological Survey and the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration watched the pole respond. Like a ball on a tilted table, it began rolling toward the stronger attractor. The Siberian blob was winning the tug of war. The acceleration was dramatic enough that in 2019, scientists released an early update to the World Magnetic Model. This model, revised every 5 years, provides the magnetic coordinates that navigation systems worldwide depend upon. Military submarines threading under Arctic ice, commercial aircraft crossing polar routes, smartphones orienting their maps, all rely on accurate knowledge of where magnetic north actually is. The 2020 update showed the pole continuing towards Siberia. The 2025 update, released in December 2024, confirmed that the pole had crossed into Russian territorial waters. It now sits closer to Siberia than to Canada, a journey of thousands of kilometers, accomplished in mere decades. But then another surprise. Around 2020, the acceleration stopped. The pole slowed dramatically, from 55 kilometers per year to roughly 35, and then to around 25. The biggest deceleration ever recorded. Why? Scientists are still debating. One hypothesis suggests that the interplay between the Canadian and Siberian blobs has reached a new equilibrium. The pole is settling into a stable position close to Siberia, but no longer racing. Another hypothesis suggests that changes in the outer core convection are ongoing, and the current slowdown is temporary. A third possibility is that we are seeing the early stages of a more significant reorganization of the field. The uncertainty is profound. Despite decades of satellite observations, despite computer models running on the most powerful supercomputers available, the outer core remains mysterious. It is 3,000 kilometers away. We cannot visit it. We cannot sample it. We can only infer its behavior from the magnetic signatures it leaves at the surface and the seismic waves that pass through it. What we can say with confidence is that the current movement of the magnetic North Pole is unprecedented in recorded history. Not in geological history. The pole has moved before. It has moved faster before. During excursions and reversals, the pole has wandered to latitudes far from the Arctic, perhaps reaching the tropics during periods of extreme field weakness. But in the roughly 400 years since humans began systematically tracking the magnetic field, we have never seen anything like this. The South Magnetic Pole tells a different story. It has moved relatively little over the past century, travelling a distance in 100 years that the North Pole covered in a decade. This asymmetry is puzzling. The two poles are not directly opposite each other. They are not antipodal points on the globe. The South Magnetic Pole currently sits off the coast of Antarctica, roughly 1,400 kilometers from the geographic South Pole. The North Magnetic Pole is much closer to its geographic counterpart. This asymmetry reflects the complex structure of the field. The convection patterns in the outer core are not symmetric. The distribution of heat and the geometry of the core mantle boundary affect how the field is generated. Anomalies at the boundary, dense rock formations, variations in temperature, all influence the flow of liquid iron and the magnetic field it produces. One region of particular interest is the African Large Low Shear Velocity Province, a vast structure in the deep mantle beneath Africa and the South Atlantic. Seismic waves slow down as they pass through it, suggesting it is warmer and possibly chemically distinct from the surrounding mantle. This structure may affect how heat flows out of the core, altering the convection patterns and influencing the magnetic field. The connection between deep mantle, structures and surface magnetic phenomena is still being explored. It represents one of the frontiers of Earth science, a place where seismology, geodynamics, and geomagnetism intersect. Understanding these connections may eventually allow scientists to predict magnetic field changes decades or centuries in advance. But we are not there yet. What we have now is observation. The pole is moving. The field is changing. The patterns we see at the surface reflect processes happening thousands of kilometers down, in an environment we can never directly explore. We watch the symptoms and try to diagnose the underlying cause. For navigation, the practical implications are manageable. The world magnetic model is updated regularly. Smartphone companies push software updates. Airport runways are occasionally renumbered when their magnetic headings drift too far from their painted designations. The system adapts. But the movement of the pole raises deeper questions. If the field is changing this dramatically at the surface, what is happening in the outer core? Are we witnessing normal fluctuations in a stable system? Or are we seeing the early signs of something more significant? History suggests that magnetic changes do not happen in isolation. The paleomagnetic record shows that reversals and excursions cluster in time. There are periods of stability lasting millions of years. There are periods of instability with multiple reversals per million years. We appear to be in an unstable period. The last reversal was 780,000 years ago. But there have been numerous excursions since then. Brief periods lasting a few centuries to a few millennia, when the field weakened dramatically, the poles wandered far from their normal positions, and then everything returned to normal. The most recent excursion happened roughly 42,000 years ago, the Lachance event. Named after a village in France where it was first identified in ancient lava flows. During this event, the field dropped to perhaps 5% of its current strength. The poles may have briefly reversed or at least wandered chaotically across the globe. Cosmic radiation flooded the atmosphere, and life on Earth responded. What happened during that event? What did it mean for the creatures living through it? Those questions lead us to one of the most fascinating and controversial chapters in the story of Earth's magnetic field. In the next chapter, we will examine what happens when the field collapses. We will look at the evidence written in rocks, in ice, in the growth rings of ancient trees, and we will confront the possibility that a magnetic catastrophe could happen again. Chapter 3. When the field collapses. Imagine standing outside on a clear night. Above you the sky blazes with light. Not stars, not the moon. Aurora. Green and red curtains of glowing atmosphere stretching from horizon to horizon. Not just at high latitudes, everywhere. The equator. The tropics. Places that have never seen the northern lights in recorded history. Now imagine that this display continues not for a few hours but for weeks, months. The sky never fully darkens. The aurora pulses and shifts, brighter during solar storms, dimmer during calm periods, but always present. A constant reminder that something fundamental has changed. This is what it looks like when the magnetic field collapses. When the shield that normally deflects solar radiation toward the poles weakens so dramatically that charged particles penetrate the atmosphere at all latitudes. When the magnetosphere, that invisible bubble protecting the planet, shrinks and becomes chaotic. We know this happens because the evidence is preserved in the geological record. Every time a geomagnetic reversal or excursion occurs, the weakening of the field leaves signatures that persist for millions of years. The first signature is paleomagnetic. As lava cools, as sediment settles, tiny magnetic particles lock in a record of the field's direction and intensity. When the field is strong, these particles align crisply. When the field is weak, the alignment is more scattered, more random. During reversals, the recorded direction shifts. North-pointing particles appear where south-pointing particles were expected. The transition itself is visible as a zone of confused orientation, representing the centuries or millennia when the field had no clear dipole, when multiple poles may have existed simultaneously. The second signature is chemical. When the field weakens, more cosmic rays reach the upper atmosphere. These high-energy particles collide with atoms of nitrogen and oxygen, producing rare isotopes through nuclear reactions, beryllium-10, carbon-14. These isotopes fall to the surface in precipitation, become incorporated into ice sheets, absorbed by trees, deposited in sediments. Spikes in their concentration mark periods of enhanced cosmic ray flux, periods when the magnetic shield was down. The third signature is biological. Some researchers argue that major magnetic events correlate with changes in life on Earth. Extinctions, evolutionary bursts, behavioral shifts. This evidence is more controversial, more subject to interpretation, but it suggests that when the field fails, the consequences extend beyond physics and chemistry into the realm of living systems. The most thoroughly studied magnetic collapse is the Brunhes-Matuyama reversal, the last complete flip of the poles approximately 780,000 years ago. The paleomagnetic record from this event has been examined at sites across the globe. The reversal itself was not instantaneous. It took thousands of years, perhaps as few as 1,000, perhaps as many as 22,000. Different studies give different estimates depending on the resolution of the geological record they examine. During the transition, the field strength dropped dramatically. Estimates suggest it fell to between 10 and 25% of normal. The dipole structure weakened. The field became more complex, with multiple poles appearing simultaneously in different locations. A compass during this period would have been useless. It might have pointed to a spot in the mid-Atlantic one year and a location in the Pacific the next. The cosmic ray flux increased correspondingly. Beryllium-10 concentrations in ice cores and sediment records spiked during this interval. Carbon-14 production rose. The atmosphere was being bombarded with radiation that it normally never experiences. What did this mean for life on Earth? The evidence is ambiguous. There is no mass extinction clearly associated with the Brunhes-Matuyama reversal. Many species, including our own ancestors, the various hominins that populated Africa and Eurasia 780,000 years ago, survived the transition without obvious difficulty. Some researchers argue this demonstrates that reversals are not dangerous. The magnetic field can collapse, the poles can flip, and life goes on. Others point to subtler effects. The fossil record is not fine-grained enough to detect extinctions lasting a few centuries. If a reversal killed off species through gradual stress rather than sudden catastrophe, the signal might be lost in the noise of normal background extinction. We simply do not have the resolution to know for certain. But not all magnetic events are full reversals, some are excursions. Brief episodes lasting a few hundred to a few thousand years when the field weakens dramatically and the poles wander but ultimately return to their original configuration without completing a full flip. These events are more frequent than reversals. There have been at least 15 excursions since the Brunhes-Matuyama reversal, perhaps more. The most recent and arguably the most interesting is the Lachaume excursion. 42,000 years ago, named after the French village where Pierre Norbert Bonhomme first identified anomalous magnetic directions in volcanic rock in the 1960s. The Lachaume was not a quiet event. The magnetic field dropped to approximately 5% of its current strength, the lowest values recorded in any excursion or reversal of the past several million years. For roughly 250 years, the field was in freefall. Then, for approximately 440 years, the poles appeared to reverse. North became south, south became north. Then, as suddenly as it began, the event ended. The field recovered. The poles returned to their original positions. The whole episode lasted less than 1,000 years. That might sound like a long time. It is not. In geological terms, the Lachaume was a blink, a hiccup, a momentary lapse in the planetary shield that otherwise operates continuously across billions of years. But it was not a quiet hiccup. The consequences rippled across the planet, and we know this because of a remarkable discovery made in New Zealand in 2019. Workers at a geothermal plant near Ngawa were excavating when they uncovered the trunk of an ancient tree, a kauri, one of the largest tree species in the world. This particular specimen had been buried in peat for more than 40,000 years, preserved intact. Its growth rings still readable. Scientists recognized immediately what they had found: a tree that had lived through the La Champs excursion, a tree whose annual rings recorded the atmospheric conditions year by year during the magnetic collapse. They began to analyze the carbon-14 content of each ring. The results were stunning. The radiocarbon spike during the La Champs was larger and more prolonged than previous estimates had suggested. The cosmic ray bombardment was intense, but more importantly, the precise dating allowed researchers to correlate the magnetic event with other environmental records: ice cores, cave formations, sediment deposits. A picture emerged. A picture of a planet in crisis. During the La Champs, atmospheric ozone concentrations dropped. The intense ultraviolet radiation reaching the lower atmosphere broke apart ozone molecules faster than they could reform. The protective ozone layer, already thinner at the poles, thinned everywhere. Ultraviolet radiation levels at the surface increased. Not enough to cause immediate death, but enough to stress biological systems, enough to increase mutation rates, enough to affect behavior. Weather patterns shifted. The tropical rain belts moved. The Southern Ocean westerly winds changed their track. Moisture that had flowed to some regions now flowed elsewhere. Australia grew drier. Some parts of the Northern Hemisphere grew colder. The climate did not change uniformly. It became more variable, more unpredictable. Different regions experienced different effects. The researchers who analysed the Curry Tree data proposed a controversial hypothesis. They suggested that the environmental stress of the La Champs contributed to major changes in human and animal populations. The timing aligned. The final extinction of Australian megafauna, the disappearance of Neanderthals from Europe, the sudden proliferation of cave art among modern humans. All of these events cluster around 42,000 years ago. The hypothesis is seductive but far from proven. Critics point out that the timing is not as precise as the researchers claim. Australian megafauna were already in decline before the La Champs. Neanderthals had been losing ground to modern humans for millennia. Cave art may have existed earlier but simply not survived. Correlation is not causation. Yet the coincidence is striking, and there are mechanisms that could link magnetic collapse to biological consequences. Increased ultraviolet radiation damages DNA. Ozone depletion affects plant productivity. Climate shifts alter food availability. Animals that rely on magnetic navigation, birds, sea, turtles, whales, would have lost their internal compasses. Humans might have responded to the environmental chaos by seeking shelter. Caves offer protection from ultraviolet radiation. Caves maintain stable temperatures regardless of external weather. Caves would have become increasingly attractive refuges during a period of magnetic collapse. And inside those caves, sheltered from the cosmic assault above, humans began painting images on the walls. Is this the explanation for the sudden flowering of cave art 42,000 years ago? The red ochre handprints, the animal figures, the abstract symbols. Were our ancestors recording their experience of a world transformed, hiding from an invisible catastrophe they could not understand? We cannot know for certain. The hypothesis is elegant but unprovable. The scientists who proposed it called the period the Adams Event, a tribute to Douglas Adams, the author who declared in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that 42 was the answer to life, the universe, and everything. What we can say with confidence is that the La Champs was real. The magnetic field collapsed. Cosmic radiation flooded the atmosphere. The environment changed. Something happened. Whether that something drove extinctions and shaped human behavior remains an open question. The broader implication is clear. When the magnetic field fails, the consequences extend beyond compasses pointing the wrong direction. The atmosphere changes. The climate responds, life feels the effects. The shield we take for granted matters in ways we are only beginning to understand. And if the current weakening of the field continues, if we are approaching another excursion or reversal, those consequences will unfold again. Perhaps differently, perhaps more severely, perhaps in ways that interact with the already stressed systems of a warming planet. In the next chapter, we will dive deeper into the La Chance event. We will examine the evidence more closely. We will consider the objections of critics, and we will ask what the past can teach us about the future. Chapter 4. The Adams Event, 2021. A paper appears in the journal Science. The title is Measured, Technical, a Global Environmental Crisis 42,000 Years Ago. The conclusions are anything but measured. The authors claim to have found evidence that the La Chance excursion triggered a cascade of environmental disasters, ozone depletion, climate shifts, extinctions, behavioral transformations, a near apocalypse written in the rings of ancient trees. The lead author is Alan Cooper, a renowned paleogeneticist who had spent decades reconstructing the evolutionary history of extinct species. His co-authors include experts in radiocarbon dating, climate modelling, and geomagnetic reconstruction. The team had worked for years assembling their case. Their centrepiece was the New Zealand kauri tree. This specimen had lived from approximately 42,500 to 41,000 years ago. Its growth rings provided nearly continuous records spanning the entire La Chance excursion. By measuring the carbon-14 concentration in each ring, the researchers could track how cosmic ray flux changed year by year as the magnetic field collapsed and recovered. The data revealed a profound spike. Carbon-14 production increased dramatically during the magnetic minimum, confirming that the shield was down and radiation was flooding in. But the team went further. They used the precise dating to synchronize records from across the globe. Ice cores from Greenland, stalagmites from Chinese caves, sediment deposits from Australian lakes. When they aligned these records, patterns emerged. The timing of climate shifts in different regions matched. The drying of Australia coincided with changes in North Atlantic circulation. Shifts in vegetation recorded in pollen deposits happened simultaneously on different continents. The researchers argued this synchronization could only be explained by a global forcing mechanism, the magnetic collapse. They then built computer models to simulate what such a collapse would do to the atmosphere. The results showed that the weakened magnetic field, combined with a grand solar minimum that happened to occur during the same period, would have devastated the ozone layer. Ozone concentrations could have dropped by 5% globally. At some latitudes, the depletion would have been far more severe. Ultraviolet radiation levels at the surface would have increased by a factor of 2 or 3. The biological implications followed. Increased UV damages DNA. It suppresses immune systems. It kills phytoplankton in the oceans, disrupting the base of the marine food chain. It forces behavioral changes in animals that need to avoid the damaging rays. Nocturnal activity becomes advantageous. Shelter becomes essential. The team pointed to the clustering of significant events around 2,000 years ago. The extinction of Australian megafauna, including giant kangaroos, giant wombats, and marsupial lions. The final disappearance of Neanderthals from Europe. The apparent emergence of elaborate cave art among anatomically modern humans. They called this period the Adams Event, both as a tribute to Douglas Adams and as a shorthand for a constellation of catastrophic changes. The name caught on. Media coverage was extensive. Headlines declared that scientists had solved the mystery of Neanderthal extinction, that they had explained the origins of cave art, that they had found the real apocalypse that shaped human prehistory. But science is not settled by press releases. Almost immediately, criticism emerged. Other researchers challenged the timeline. The dating of Australian megafauna extinctions is imprecise. Some species may have disappeared long before the La Chance. Others may have survived long after. The apparent clustering around 42,000 years might be an artifact of the radiocarbon calibration curves used to convert laboratory dates into calendar years. Improve the calibration and the clustering might disappear. Critics also challenge the mechanism. Geomagnetic reversals have happened hundreds of times over the past several 100 million years. Mass extinctions have also happened, but they do not consistently align with reversals. The Great Permian extinction that killed 90% of marine species occurred during a period of normal magnetic polarity. The dinosaur extinction at the end of the Cretaceous happened near a reversal, but the reversal occurred millions of years before the asteroid impact that actually caused the extinction. If magnetic collapse were a reliable killer, we should see clearer correlations in the geological record. The Neanderthal question drew particular scrutiny. Neanderthals had survived previous geomagnetic excursions, including the Blake excursion approximately 114,000 years ago. That event did not drive them to extinction. Why would the Lachon be different? Moreover, Neanderthals disappeared at different times in different regions. Some populations vanished more than 50,000 years ago. Others persisted until roughly 40,000 years ago, or even later in some refugia. The extinction was not sudden. It was a drawn-out replacement as modern humans expanded their range and Neanderthals contracted theirs. A formal response appeared in Science later that year. A group of researchers led by paleoanthropologists and archaeologists published a comment challenging the Adams event hypothesis point by point. They argued that the evidence for megafaunal extinction clustering was weak, that the connection between the Lachons and Neanderthal demise was unsupported, and that the supposed link to cave art was speculative at best. The authors of the original paper responded, defending their methodology and noting that scientific debates take time to resolve. They acknowledged uncertainty, but maintained that the coincidence of so many changes around 42,000 years ago demanded explanation. The Lachon, they argued, remained the best candidate for a global forcing mechanism. Where does this leave us? The honest answer is that we do not know. The Adams event hypothesis is neither proven nor disproven. The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. The mechanisms are plausible but not certain. The timing is close but not exact. What we can say is that the Lachon's excursion was a real event with real consequences. The magnetic field collapsed, cosmic radiation increased, atmospheric chemistry changed. These are facts recorded in ice and rock and tree rings. The question is whether those changes were severe enough to reshape life on Earth. And that question cannot be answered with current evidence. We need better dating. We need more records. We need models that can simulate the full complexity of Earth systems during a magnetic collapse. The controversy also reveals something important about how science works. High-profile claims attract scrutiny. Scrutiny improves understanding. Even if the Adams event hypothesis turns out to be wrong, the debate it triggered has advanced our knowledge of what magnetic collapses do to the planet. Every criticism forces researchers to refine their methods, to seek better evidence, to make sharper arguments. And there is a deeper lesson. The past is a laboratory. Every magnetic excursion, every reversal, every period of weakening or strengthening leaves traces that we can read if we look carefully enough. By studying these events, we prepare for the future. If another Lachon scale collapse occurs, we will not be caught completely off guard. We will have models. We will have predictions. We will have some idea of what to expect. The fossil record suggests that life is resilient. Reversals happen regularly on geological timescales and mass. Extinctions do not accompany everyone. Most species adapt. Most ecosystems recover. The planet has weathered magnetic storms for billions of years. But modern humans have created something new. A technological civilization. A global infrastructure dependent on electricity, satellites, and precise navigation. The question is not whether life will survive a magnetic collapse. Life almost certainly will. The question is whether civilization will survive intact, whether the systems we depend on can function when the shield fails. That question leads us away from prehistory and toward the present, away from ancient trees and toward orbiting satellites, away from philosophical debates about Neanderthals and toward practical concerns about power grids. But before we turn to those modern concerns, we must examine another piece of the puzzle, a set of events that occurred around the same time as the Lachon, events that have generated their own controversies, their own sensational claims, their own fierce debates, the megafloods, the sudden climate shifts, the possibility that cataclysmic processes reshaped the Earth at the end of the last ice age. In the next chapter, we will explore the evidence for ancient floods of unimaginable scale. We will consider whether pole shifts, magnetic or otherwise, might have triggered these catastrophes, and we will encounter the theories of catastrophists, the researchers who argue that history is punctuated by sudden violent transformations rather than gradual change. Chapter 5: Megafloods and Ice Ages. 12,900 years ago, the world was warming. The ice sheets that had covered much of North America and Europe for tens of thousands of years were retreating. Glaciers melted, sea levels rose. Life expanded into territories that had been locked under kilometers of frozen water. Then, suddenly, everything reversed. Temperatures plummeted. In Greenland, the change happened within decades, perhaps within years. Temperatures dropped by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. Glaciers that had been retreating began advancing again. The warmth that had seemed permanent vanished. Winter returned with a vengeance. This period is called the Younger Dryas, named after Dryas octopetala, an Arctic flower whose pollen suddenly reappears in European sediments from this time. The flower had been common during the Ice Age, then disappeared as the climate warmed, then came back as temperatures crashed. Its return marks one of the most dramatic and puzzling climate events in recent Earth history. The Younger Dryas lasted approximately 1,200 years. Then, around 11,700 years ago, it ended as abruptly as it began. Temperatures rose. The ice retreated for good. The current warm period, the Holocene, began. The modern world, geologically speaking, was born. What caused this sudden reversal? Why did warming stop and cooling begin? And what does this have to do with pole shifts and magnetic catastrophes? The prevailing scientific explanation involves water, lots of water, an almost unimaginable amount of water. During the Ice Age, a vast lake formed along the southern edge of the Laurentide ice sheet, the glacier that covered most of Canada and parts of the northern United States. This lake is called Lake Agassiz, named after the Swiss geologist Louis Agassiz, who pioneered the study of ice ages. At its maximum extent, Lake Agassiz was larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. It held more fresh water than any lake in Earth's history. The lake was trapped. Ice blocked its natural drainage routes. Meltwater accumulated year after year, filling the basin to extraordinary depths. The surface area expanded to cover more than 400,000 square kilometers. The volume exceeded 15,000 cubic kilometers. Then the ice dam broke. When the dam failed, the water escaped. Not gradually, catastrophically. A flood of almost inconceivable magnitude poured into the ocean. Some of the water may have flowed through the St. Lawrence Valley into the North Atlantic. Other evidence suggests it roared north through the Mackenzie Valley into the Arctic Ocean. The exact pathway is still debated. The consequences are not. Fresh water is lighter than salt water. When the flood reached the ocean, it spread across the surface, forming a cap that did not mix with the denser water below. This cap disrupted the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, the system of currents that carries warm water from the tropics northward and cold water from the Arctic southward. This circulation is what makes Europe habitable, despite being at the same latitude as Labrador. Without it, Western Europe would be far colder. The freshwater cap shut down the circulation, or at least weakened it dramatically. The warmth that the ocean had been delivering to the North Atlantic region stopped arriving, temperatures fell, ice advanced. The younger Dryas began. This is the standard model. It is elegant. It explains the sudden onset of cooling. It explains why the cooling was most severe in regions around the North Atlantic. It explains why the event ended when it did, once the fresh water was diluted and the circulation resumed. But not everyone accepts this explanation, and this is where the story becomes more controversial. In 2007, a group of researchers proposed an alternative hypothesis. They argued that the younger Dryas was triggered not by an ice dam collapse but by a cosmic impact. A comet or asteroid, they claimed, struck North America approximately 12,900 years ago. The impact ignited wildfires across the continent. It destabilized the ice sheet. It killed the megafauna, the mammoths, the mastodons, the giant ground sloths, the saber-toothed cats. It ended the Clovis culture, the distinctive stone tool tradition of the first Americans. The younger Dryas impact hypothesis was sensational. It made headlines. It appeared in documentaries. It attracted both passionate supporters and fierce critics. The evidence cited by proponents included unusual materials found at sites across North America and Europe, dated to roughly 12,900 years ago. Nanodiamonds, metallic microspherules, carbon spherules, elevated iridium concentrations, platinum anomalies, materials that, according to the researchers, could only be produced by a cosmic impact. Critics pushed back hard. They argued that the supposed impact markers were not reproducible. Different laboratories analyzing the same samples got different results. The nanodiamonds might be contaminants or natural products unrelated to impacts. The spherules might be industrial slag or volcanic material. The platinum could have come from terrestrial sources. A systematic review in 2011 concluded that none of the original impact signatures had been independently verified. 7 of the 12 lines of evidence had proven non-reproducible. The remaining signatures seemed to represent either natural processes or terrestrial rather than extraterrestrial sources. Supporters responded by publishing additional studies claiming to find impact markers at new sites. Critics responded with additional refutations. The debate continues, though mainstream scientific opinion has largely rejected the impact hypothesis. But the younger Dryas raises another question, one that connects to our central topic. Could a magnetic event have triggered or contributed to the sudden climate shift? The timing is suggestive. The younger Dryas occurred roughly 12,900 years ago. The last significant geomagnetic excursion before the Lachlan was the Gothenburg excursion, which some researchers date to approximately 13,000 years ago. The dating is imprecise. Different studies give different ages, but the proximity has led some to wonder whether magnetic changes might have played a role. The mechanism would be indirect. A magnetic excursion weakens the field. More cosmic rays reach the atmosphere. These cosmic rays affect cloud formation by ionizing molecules that serve as nuclei for water droplet condensation. More clouds mean more reflection of sunlight. More reflection means cooling.